Hi there, everyone. I'm Sam Danley, Associate Editor of QSR and FSR magazines, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, sponsored by Paytronix, that dives into the art of one-to-one win-back campaigns. We're going to hear about some powerful strategies restaurants can use to reconnect with lapsing customers through personalized marketing efforts. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started here. First, a recording of this session will be linked at qsrmagazine.com. You can also use today's login link for on-demand viewing. And second, we will be answering audience questions at the end of the program, but please feel free to submit a question in the Q&A box at any time throughout the webinar. And now to begin. We are joined today by Michelle Casey, a senior loyalty strategist at Paytronix, where she specializes in developing and launching sophisticated customer engagement programs for prominent national restaurant chains. With over 10 years of experience, Michelle leads cross-functional teams to turn innovative visions into actionable and impactful customer experiences. And with that, I will turn things over to her to get started. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. So as you can see, we're here about win-back, so let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to talk about is win-back in itself. Paytronix has a product called one-to-one win-back, which we'll get into some of those details. But in general, win-backs are campaigns that are strategic marketing initiatives aimed at re-engaging customers. So that's a lot of jargon. It just means sometimes people fall off and they're not coming as frequently as they had been in the past, and we want to re-engage them. It's really important to re-engage these guests. They were loyal at one point, presumably. There's a lot of reasons people become lapsed. It could be something as simple as a vacation or a diet. But in general, we still want to try and re-engage these guests and make sure that your brand is the top brand on their mind when they're looking to go out to restaurants. Some of these guests are going to need a little bit of an extra nudge. As I said, sometimes these guests will just come back on their own. But for those that maybe need that little extra boost, we want to kind of be in their inbox and encourage them to come to your specific brand. The benefit of win-back is beyond that one visit that we get them back for. We really want to re-engage the guest to become, again, a loyal member who is visiting on some sort of regular cadence. So it's important to think of win-back success a little bit beyond just the one visit that we're striving for, and as something that we want them to be, again, a long-term loyalty member. So we're going to talk about win-back as a general sense for the next couple of slides, but we also want to talk about Paytronix one-to-one win-back tool, which takes a lot of some of the ambiguity of what to choose around win-back and determines it for you. So on the next slide here, we want to talk about kind of getting started with a win-back. Say that you're looking to do something with your win-back. What are kind of the first key steps to get going with that? So the first one is kind of, what are you already doing? Is there anything that is happening to re-engage guests? Maybe you have something simple like 90 days since they last visited. You send them a message. But either way, we want to kind of make sure that we're not doubling up on some of the offers. We also want to understand what is kind of the base level of success, right? So if you're already doing something, then what are we kind of evaluating as the success level of that, whether it is or isn't? The next thing you want to kind of think about is what it means to be lapsed, right? So what segments are we going to target as a lapsed guest that we want to win back, and what kind of offers are appropriate for that person? Is it one message? Is it 10 messages? How do we kind of narrow down what it is that we're looking for? And then the last thing around it is really setting up, what is your goal, right? Not everyone has the same goal for win back. It seems like it's obviously, well, we want them to visit, but do you want them to visit and spend more? Do you want them to visit and visit online. So there's a couple of different things that'll probably come into play when you're setting up, what your goal is for a win back, and your KPI should certainly reflect that. So we're going to get into that a little bit more in a coming slide, but it's just, these are kind of the things that we want to be thinking about if we're starting initiatives around setting up win back campaigns. So leveraging technology for win back. So Paytronix uses AI to analyze different segments, but anyone can really determine different win-back segments. So the very first question I usually get when we kind of introduce win-back as a concept is how many days lapsed is lapsed, right? Is it 30 days? Is it 90 days? A general kind of rule of thumb is it depends on the brand to a certain degree. Coffee is going to have a much higher frequency than a full service restaurant, but still it doesn't really narrow down exactly what that number is. So really what Paytronix looks at is more of a one-to-one approach of it. We actually look at the individual guest and not necessarily the brand concept as a general theme. So if a guest is coming in every single week like clockwork and they miss 2 weeks, that's lapse. But if someone's coming in every month like clockwork and they miss 2 weeks, well, that's expected. So that's kind of the idea of picking smart segmentations for when you want to reach out a guest. If someone's coming in every week and you don't contact them for 90 days, that's a really long time to kind of leave that account on the table. There's also something nice about kind of practical implementation, particularly with Paytronix. It's that when we kind of create this universal set of parameters that make sense for all of our clients, which is the one-to-one win back, there's a lot more that comes with it, like benchmarking, reporting, standard dashboards. More clients that use it, the smarter that it gets. So there's additional benefits to just kind of the guest perspective, is that it kind of grows upon itself to become more powerful as time goes on. We talked a little bit about measuring for success, right? So the common thing that I say, clients will come to me and say, was this successful? And my first question is, as compared to what? So we just want to make sure that up front, we're kind of establishing, again, what are the goals? What are the KPIs that we're really looking at to determine if it has changed or gotten better? And what means better, right? Is 1.5 frequency better than 1.6? Is that not a big enough difference? So sometimes it's about setting a numerical goal, but sometimes it's just about calling out what KPIs you want to look at. The other thing I like to call out as well is consider how you're going to evaluate it. So at Paytronix, we're almost always going to be on the side of having a control audience. That really helps us say, what would guests in this same time period have done had they not gotten the message? So a lot of times you'll see with promotions that are maybe like just more of a ad hoc promo that you can do a pre-post analysis and get a pretty good idea of it. But by definition of win-back members, they had not visited recently. So if you're looking at, well, how much did they visit in the week before and how much did they visit in the promo week, it's always going to be a skewed kind of perspective. So it's really important to think upfront how you want to evaluate it and what metrics are going to be evaluated, so that when you get there, you have the information that you need. You definitely want to think about, what you're giving out and when you're giving it out. So, what kind of ROI are you expecting from, setting up a win-back promo? Often you'll see that the monetary value of a win-back immediately afterwards isn't always the best, right? Because these are people who had not been in a while and maybe you're giving them a reward, so their check is lower than average. But again, the long-term plan is to have them coming back on a regular cadence. So you kind of want to consider how far out you're going to look. Is one visit during the promo period enough, or do you want to look at their next 6 months and how much they're really visiting in that time frame? Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics of Paytronix one-to-one win-back. So the system that we've developed is kind of a reaction to all the things I've been talking about before. Who's the right audience? When do we really send it? What rewards should we be giving? So the one-to-one win-back tool is a service that creates these segments for you and tells you when to send it. So as soon as a guest visits in our system, they have a last visit date, right? That was the date that they visit. And then we calculate all the dates in the future where they're going to hit certain lapsing points. So we could say, okay, this person visited today. If they don't visit again in the next 3 weeks, we're going to consider them slowing down. And then if they don't visit again for the next 8 weeks, they're lapsing. These are made up numbers. Of course, it's one-to-one, so it depends on the exact user. Some people might be considered slowing down if they haven't been in 14 days. The next person might not be considered slowing down if they haven't been in for 45 days. So that's what the one-to-one aspect is really determining how lapsed is this member compared to their known visit behavior before we called them lapsed. So on the side here, you can see there's different thresholds to find. So the first one is slowing down. This is really like an early indicator. This isn't like a panic, they haven't been in forever. This is, hey, we noticed they had a regular cadence and they've started to shift away from that regular cadence. And often we send a message that is of the tone of like, hey, like, maybe try out this new item. We haven't seen you in a while, but generally it doesn't kind of come with a reward. The next one is lapsing. So this is people who are lapsed, probably in the more traditional sense that we're thinking of it. They've definitely fallen off their cadence. It's not to the point where it's so far gone where we feel like we'll never see them again, but it is probably the time to start thinking about what motivations you can provide for them to choose your brand over other brands. Then there's likely to have lapsed. This is kind of like the last effort. These people have reached a percentage of lapse that is, the highest level of the three, certainly. And this is kind of like the last hurrah. We really want to try and get them in here. We find that people who get past their likelihood to lapse date is much less likely to come in even with a reward. So these rewards tend to get a little bit richer and are of a general higher value to the guest. So let's talk about some best practices in this particular sense, particularly the one-to-one win-back. But I think that even if you don't have one-to-one win-back options, these general themes will kind of go forward. So it's important to think about the email and the creative that kind of goes around it. Maybe you send mobile messages or something to that effect. But we definitely want to make sure that the message stands out and is relevant to the information at hand. So if you're giving them a reward, what's the reward? How do they redeem it? How long do they have to redeem it? So really thinking through what is all the crucial information that this user needs to know, considering that you may be one of dozens of other emails in their inbox. It can be a good opportunity to kind of switch them up too. People become lapsed and active and back to lapsed over and over again. That's just kind of the natural flow of how people, visit restaurants and go to do different things. So it's a good opportunity to maybe put LTO information in there. They may get it 1 month and then 6 months later they get it again. Just make sure it's, topical, relevant information to someone who maybe hasn't been in a while. What's new? What's fresh for them to kind of know about your brand? So going back to the 3 levels of the one-to-one win-back that Paytronix has, the first one, that slowing down one, we often see that as just kind of like a nudge. Sometimes we don't even say like the "we miss you" language. It's kind of just informational. Again, this is probably that good spot for something like an LTO or some sort of key feature. Maybe you've developed a new app. Maybe you have online ordering. There's a whole bunch of different things that can kind of go in there. Or it can just be kind of a reminder of why someone likes a brand, right? What's your top items? What's kind of the big hero image that's going to convince them to say, oh yeah, I love this place and I need to come back. Once we get to lapsing, which is, kind of that medium level, like we kind of want to push them a little bit, we usually say a reward range of 25 to 40% the value of the check. Sometimes you hear us talk about this as like a value of an item. So it might be up to 50% off of a single item. So you have to decide what makes sense kind of for your brand. So the best comparison I have is like a coffee shop. If we give away a free coffee, they're going to come in and just get that free coffee and leave with a $0 check. So that's when you might want to look at things like a little bit more per item. But if you're kind of a full service restaurant, people get the appetizer and the dessert and multiple entrees, you can maybe look at that a little bit different. You know, you can give them a free drink because someone's not going to come to a full service restaurant, get a free drink, and then leave with a $0 check. So just kind of keep your item count and the types of items you sell in mind when you're thinking about rewarding. When we get to this last level here, this is when it needs to get a little bit richer. I still generally don't recommend you allow guests to leave with a $0 check. We want to win them back, but we also want them to be participating members of the program, which includes spend. So this is where we kind of up it to 35 to 55%. Again, if you're going by item, maybe it's a whole free item, but just again, make sure that that whole free item isn't the whole check. Coffee is a good example, but sandwich brands are a good example. If you give away a free sandwich, they might just leave with a $0 check. So it doesn't, it applies in a couple of different areas, but just kind of make sure that that is making the most sense for your brand and what offerings you have. Cool. So a summary is, really understand your customer segments and what it means to be lapsed and, what are the behaviors that you want the guests to be doing. So again, talking about goals, it's sometimes not enough just to have them visit. They need to visit, they need to be spending money, they potentially need to be ordering online, adding stored value. There's so many different goals that people have, and you can use Winback as an excuse to kind of get people to be in the lane of what a very loyal member looks like. And often that looks like people who order online and use stored value and some of these other tertiary goals of a program. And then personalized engagement strategies. So one-to-one win-back is a tool that really helps you to kind of get that done in a simpler way. But in general, you do want it to be personalized to the user. Again, the sample of I'm someone who comes in every week. If you don't message me for 90 days, that's a little bit late. Also keeping in mind things like preferences and what they purchase and do they prefer to already order online? Can we encourage them to do that more? Or maybe you want them in store. So think about some of these secondary goals that will really layer on to the win-back to make it more powerful and more effective as you're trying to win back these guests that, have already shown an interest in your brand in particular. Cool. All right, well, I believe that brings us to the Q&A section. So Sam, I don't know if we have some queued up here that we want to talk about.
We do indeed. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. Lots of great insights and takeaways there. So yeah, looking at audience questions now, looks like we do have some that have come in already. The first one here, someone asks, can you elaborate on how different customer segments might respond differently to win-back strategies and how you adjust the campaign parameters accordingly?
Yeah, for sure. So a good example is, again, this kind of frequency that the guest had beforehand. So if you are someone who's coming in very regularly, if you think of like a Starbucks type person that's going 3 or 4 times a week, you're going to approach that person differently because they're so valuable to you. Someone who's coming in 3 or 4 times a week is someone who is going to bring a lot into your business. So when you lose them, that's a big deal. It's a big deal when you lose any guest, but that's the type of way that you can react differently. So for that guest, maybe an early message does have a reward because we really got to make sure that they stay a loyal member and continue to behave the way that we want them to behave, as opposed to someone who, is like my parents and they go to Starbucks, but maybe it's like, a couple times a year. And, maybe you don't have to be quite as aggressive with them, but at the same time, if it's been a long time since they've been in, maybe you do need to start to think about richer rewards because obviously there's other things that are kind of taking their attention. So that's a way that you could react to kind of a similar situation of someone lapsing relative to their own situation and treat it differently.
We've got another one here, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about right at the beginning about kind of beyond that one visit you're trying to get someone back for. Someone asks, beyond immediate revenue recovery, what are the long-term impacts of successful win-back campaigns on customer loyalty and lifetime value?
Yeah, for sure. So the more someone becomes lapsed, the lower their lifetime value gets. Because if you kind of think of it as a predictive kind of metric, if someone's not coming in anymore, then their customer lifetime value is tanking. So what that's going to do is even one visit immediately raises their customer lifetime value because they have a higher likelihood of coming in the future. But kind of bigger picture effects on your whole loyalty program is this kind of concept that we call the leaky bucket. You're getting people into your program and people are losing in retention. So the harder that your win back is working, the less you have to focus on acquisition, and guests are most expensive at acquisition. So the long-term effect is that we're really going to spend a little bit amount of money to get your known loyal guests loyal again, as opposed to spending relatively a lot more money getting brand new guests.
This is an interesting one here. Someone wants to know, how do you integrate win-back campaigns with other ongoing marketing strategies without overwhelming your customers with communications?
Yeah, for sure. So there's definitely some sort of logic to selective exclusion one way or the other. So it depends on kind of what the richer reward is or what you want people participating in. But I've seen clients pause win back if they want to make sure that this big ad hoc promo is going out and that is the main focus. I've also seen people just say, like, we're going to flag everyone who's in win back, and when you're in win back, you're not going to get the ad hoc promos. So that way we can kind of just let the win back do what it's due. Generally, win back has slightly richer rewards than ad hoc, not a fixed rule or guarantee, but generally people prefer that. So I do think that there's a sense of, as I said, the selective exclusion to make sure that people are kind of getting certain things at once. If you have other flows, there's other types of flows that are not necessarily a win-back flow, like an early life cycle flow. Sometimes it's just making sure that they don't overlap or seeing them as one user journey and not two unique user journeys, so you can see how people flow from one kind of initiative to the next.
We've got another one here. Someone wants to know a little bit more about the use of AI. And they asked, are you utilizing AI to both trigger and develop the content of your reach out program? How does that work for you at Paytronix?
We are using AI to develop the score that is assigned to the guest that says if they are a certain percentage lapse and if they are triggering one of these three messages. It's a little less AI in the execution of it. We say, because that part has already been done. So we say, okay, once they've reached this point, we're going to send them a message. So the AI really comes in that calculating that days between visits, right? How do we know your lapse? Because you were coming in every 2 weeks and now it's been the 4th week without seeing you. So that's really where the AI plays in. The AI looks at both multi-merchant and then your own merchant. So it kind of takes into a couple of factors into play to kind of determine, what is what we consider standard as compared to lapse. What is a standard way to call you lapsed?
Yeah, I feel like no matter what the topic, you can't escape the AI term showing up in there. It's just everywhere you look, you see it now. We got another one here. Someone wants to know, from your experience, how does the ROI from personalized win-back campaigns compare to broader, non-segmented marketing campaigns?
Broader, non-segmented marketing campaigns. I guess it depends on the exact nature of the question. So win back as compared to an ad hoc promo, it's kind of a tough comparison. Ad hoc kind of implies that we're looking at all guests, active and lapse. Depends on the situation exactly. Where lapse is only looking at lapse. So the situation there is that lapse is going to see higher lift generally, but not higher volume. So comparatively, the win back is helping to bring back people who weren't expected to come back. So really any amount of visit and spend tends to go towards the incrementality, as opposed to an ad hoc promo that's not segmented. That's just kind of going to everyone. Maybe they were going to come in anyway. Maybe you discounted their check for no reason. So that's where you start to see that the lift maybe wasn't as great, but it's probably capturing more people in general. So you'll see higher volume. If we mean it as compared to like 30-day lapse, 60-day lapse, 90-day lapse, we generally see that the one-to-one win back is more effective because it's kind of catching the people at the right time. There's a good chance if you have a 30-day lapse that that's the exact right time for a certain percentage of the people in that filter, but the rest of them, it wasn't, right? So one thing that win back does is it actually looks at your preferred day of week. So we're sending out a message. If you're someone who always comes in on Tuesday, we're going to send you that message on Tuesday because that's probably the best chance that you're going to get it. But if we're doing a 30-day, 60, 90, and we're only sending it once a month or once a week, you might not kind of see that same one-to-one aspect to it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Looks like we've got two more here. So someone asks if you have any examples of a particularly successful win-back campaign, and then ask if you could maybe talk about what made it stand out, the strategies that were implemented, and just like the key takeaways from one of those examples.
Yeah. So something that as I was talking about before, with the win back comes kind of benchmarking, comparison points. There's kind of a lot to look at. So what we're learning with some of our clients is that win back, one-to-one win back is sort of the base layer. That tells us when we should be messaging people and about what buckets they're in. But at the same time, there's kind of other aspects to a guest than just their visit cadence, right? There's, order preferences and known behavior kind of before then, if maybe they were a very active member or kind of like a medium active member. So we're starting to kind of split up some of the subsegments. So if you see the slowing down segment, that is one big segment, but there's subsegments within that, right? So we can say everyone who is slowing down, who also orders hot coffees, for instance. And then that maybe message has a hot coffee in it. And then the cold coffee people have a cold coffee image in their email. So, there's other ways to break that down. Obviously, that's just kind of a simple example. But that's generally what we're seeing is most successful is people getting the win back up, kind of setting that base layer, and then kind of, dividing it up a little bit further. So I know earlier in the deck, we talked about kind of comparing it to the 30, 60, 90 to the one-to-one win back. We're kind of at the next level of that. Like win back is the new 30, 60, 90, and we're going to kind of go and cut that up a little bit more to get even more personalized. But since we're starting with such a strong base layer, it's having more of like an exponential effect as opposed to changing 60 days to 75 days or something like that.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that level of that added level of specificity and personalization can go a long way towards driving the results you want. Last one that we have here, someone wants to know, for businesses looking to scale their win-back campaigns across multiple locations or franchises, what are the primary considerations to ensure that there's consistency and also effectiveness?
Yeah, so if you're spreading it across several concepts, I think that kind of the answer to the last question is maybe a little bit more in line with that. Don't be afraid to segment a little bit further. If you have a multi-concept brand and 10 of them are FSRs and 10 of them are QSRs, maybe that's your break, not hot and cold coffee, but a preference for the FSR or the QSR brand. Across different like franchisee groups, presumably we wouldn't want to change too much with that. If it's the same concept and kind of the same rules of operation for the brand, something like a franchisee shouldn't affect it too much. If they're maybe not performing as well on some of the win-back campaigns, then maybe we just kind of address that issue specifically, as opposed to maybe finding an alternative way to address those specific guests. There's kind of this notion that people in different parts of the country react to loyalty differently, and we don't really see a whole lot of evidence of that. Certainly different brands and different individuals behave differently, but there's not a huge amount of change across the country.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone tuning in who submitted questions. We appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to add here, Michelle, before I close us out for the day?
I guess the only thing to add here is that I'm a huge proponent of win-back campaigns. It does not have to be one-to-one, but you always want to be trying to re-engage guests who were already loyal members. It's efficient, it's cost-effective, and it's definitely something that everyone should, dabble in with kind of whatever resources that you have available.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine for a lot of folks out there, this is an especially important topic right now in the choppy waters of 2024. So very timely as well. All right. Well, that is going to conclude our program for today. Many thanks to Paytronix for making this webinar possible, to everyone in the audience for attending, and of course to Michelle for sharing her insights. As a quick reminder, a recording of this program will be linked on qsrmagazine.com. You can also use today's login link to view it at any time. Thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.